Serena Davis called her boyfriend over to her bed. Andy Iverson was not the least bit suspicious about her motives. He had been dating her for over a year, and he knew that he could only do himself harm if he ever questioned her when she drew him close to a mattress or the backseat of a car. Serena smirked at her boyfriend as his hand began to creep up her skirt. "Not tonight, babe," she said, prompting a look of disappointment on the boy's face. Andy was let down by her words, but he was not inclined to try to change her mind. He had tried in the past when he figured she was playing hard to get, but he had learned that her no actually meant no. While he knew that other girls his age liked to make their men pursue and practically beg them for sex, Serena was not one of them. Serena was an honor roll student, and she was quite skilled at getting what she wanted. While she was not among the most attractive girls at the school, she was among the heaviest courted. Andy knew that every boy, who was not among the popular crowd, wanted Serena as their own. Andy was also well aware that he was lucky to have her. He knew the reason that she was attracted to him as well. Serena was well known around school for exclusively dating effeminate-looking men. While Andy often hated his appearance, he knew that it was the source of Serena's attraction to him. Serena's love had made him no longer ashamed of his physique. Andy's height was below average for his gender. He stood only 5 feet 6 inches. While he knew other guys that had no trouble finding girlfriends despite their short stature, he felt that he was also handicapped by his thin frame. He had difficulty keeping weight on, and he struggled at times to get over 100 pounds. Andy's other features failed to convey his masculinity as well. He had no hair on his body beyond his underarms, legs and privates. His heart-shaped face sported a small nose and small, rounded chin. His hair had a bright, copper-red tone that failed to excite many girls. Additionally, myths about the relationship between the size of one's feet and one's penis did him no favors with the girls. Andy had very small feet for a man, as well as small hands. Serena's insistence that he grow out his hair further contributed to his failure to sport a masculine appearance. Andy did not like the way his hair made him look, but he kept it because of how much his long hair seemed to turn Serena on. Serena's attraction to him was the one thing that made Andy feel good about himself. She was a kind-hearted girl who seemed to enjoy everything about his appearance. She gave Andy hope that a woman could possibly love a man like him. Every time he looked down into Serena's eyes, he felt a surge of passion that had been absent from him before he began to date her. She seemed to love him, and that was all Andy wanted from a girl or felt that he had a right to expect. They were both seniors in high school as they sat together on Serena's bed that fall afternoon. Serena's parents were both finishing up their workdays in the city like they did practically every weekday. The hours after school at Serena's before her parents came home were the happiest of Andy's week. He enjoyed spending time alone with her. It was not just the occasional sex that made him enjoy her company. Everything about her made Andy happy to be within her presence. Serena took Andy's hands and smiled at him as she stared up into his eyes. She had become experienced at asking what she was about to ask. Her prior 2 boyfriends had rejected her request, and she had learned from the clumsiness of her prior mistakes. She pushed her lips up to his ear and asked, "Would you like to make a deal with me, babe?" Andy pulled his head away from her and gazed down into her eyes. Figuring that he could not possibly object to whatever she asked of him, Andy replied, "I'm sure I would. Just tell me what you have in mind." Serena smiled and said, "You know that Claire's Diner is hiring, don't you?" "Claire's? Oh, that chain diner 2 towns over?" "Yes, that's the place." Andy nodded and said, "I heard about them. That's where the waitresses dress up like 50s waitresses and bring your food on skates. Kind of like an erotic Sonic." "Yup. Well, what are you telling me for? Do you want to work there? Is that it? I'd love to see you in that uniform." "I'm sure you'd look cute," Andy responded. "Not exactly," Serena replied. "Well, what do you have in mind?" "I want you to work there." "What? Are they hiring cooks?" Andy asked. No waitresses, Serena responded. Andy blinked a few times as he tried to understand what Serena was trying to ask him. Suddenly, he understood and replied, "Wait a second, do you want me to be a waitress?" Serena smiled and said, "I think you'd look cute in the uniform too." Andy blushed at her response and said, "Be that as it may, I don't think anyone would buy that I was a teenage waitress." "Well, you wouldn't really a waitress, you'd be a car hop," Serena responded. "That doesn't make it any better, Serena. I know you might be reluctant to do this, but I think you would look great." "Thanks, I guess. I can't do it though." "Why not? You have the perfect face. It'd be so pretty if we put a little makeup on it." Andy froze as he looked at his girlfriend. At that moment, he was more certain than ever that Serena was attracted to him because of his effeminate appearance. It was more than that, he quickly surmised. He realized that she liked men that looked like girls. He was not sure how he should take the revelation. It made some sense to him. He knew Serena's ex-boyfriends were not masculine-looking. However, his male ego was telling him that her statements and requests were an affront to his very identity. However, Andy's desire to stay with Serena overtook his concerns, so he asked, "Well, what do I get out of the deal?" Serena smirked and answered, "If you can get the job, I'll make love to you any way you like every day after school for a week." "Really?" Andy exclaimed. "Don't be so obviously desperate, babe. We did it yesterday." Andy nodded and asked, "Well, what if I don't get the job?" "If you don't get the job, I won't hold it against you. You won't get the sex, and I'll get to make you over, so that's really my reward if you don't get the job. That's it. Hell, you can even back out if you don't think you can do it once I get the makeup on you." The allure of having sex with his girlfriend 5 days in a row was too much for Andy to turn away from. Even though he knew that he was stupid for agreeing to do it, he smiled and took Serena up on her offer. Serena said, "Let's get started then." Andy followed her into the bathroom. She showed him her razor and her shaving foam and told him to remove all the hair from his armpits and legs. Andy nodded. After Serena left the bathroom, he striped down to his underwear and turned on the shower. He entered the shower and removed all of his body hair. He felt a little odd doing it. He felt that he was undercutting his own masculine identity by willfully making himself look even more feminine. He was ashamed enough about his girlish appearance. He knew that the loss of his body hair would only make him look like less of a man. Still, the terms of the deal made the loss of his body hair manageable for him. Andy stepped out of the shower and toweled himself off. He placed on his underwear and then opened up the bathroom room door. Andy saw Serena standing in the hallway as he exited the bathroom. She then brought him back into her bedroom. Andy walked into her room behind her and took a seat on her bed. Serena took out a bra for Andy and a pair of chino pants as Andy watched as she selected his clothes. She then walked over to Andy carrying her beige bra. She wrapped it around his body and hooked it behind his back. Andy straightened out the straps while Serena pulled out socks to stuff the bra with. Andy felt that the bra pinched his skin a little as it rested over his flat chest before Serena inserted the socks. After she finished stuffing Andy's bra, Serena gave Andy 2 pairs of panties to help keep his member tucked away. She smirked at Andy and said, "Double bag your little guy to keep him in place." Andy smiled at her and went into her bathroom carrying the panties and the pants. Serena shook her head at him as he walked out of her room. She had seen him naked several times before, but she knew that Andy did not like her seeing him naked unless sex was imminent. She found his selective modesty peculiar and unnecessary. As Andy finished tucking himself away and drawing up his pants, he heard a knock on the door. He froze as he wondered if one of Serena's parents had gotten home early. He started to shake as he knew that he would either have to exit in their daughter's pants or nude. His anxiety faded when he heard his girlfriend's voice. She said, "I've got the perfect top for you, Andy. Want to take a look?" Andy opened the door and looked at the shirt in his girlfriend's hands. The 3/4 sleeved t-shirt had red and white horizontal stripes. Serena handed Andy the shirt, and he placed it on over his bra. He checked the shirt in the mirror and was happy that scoop neck did not plunge down to where his cleavage should be. Serena smiled as she saw that her boyfriend had a completely feminine-looking body beneath his head. She smiled as she took his hand and brought him back into her bedroom to apply makeup to his face. As Andy walked towards her bedroom, he felt the feeling of the primarily cotton pants on his smooth legs as he moved. He found the feeling preferable to any other clothing he had ever worn. His hand moved across the left sleeve of his top as he sat down in front of Serena's vanity. He felt the rayon fabric and felt himself starting to become aroused. Andy could feel his member poking at the back of his pants, so he realized that he would need to control his urges when he went into Claire's diner. Meanwhile, Serena made up a bag of cosmetics for Andy before she said, "You're lucky you have an even skin tone. That really cuts down on the amount of makeup you need. I think you only need a little mascara, eyeliner, and lip gloss to look super femme." Serena decided not to apply Andy's makeup. She instead told Andy, "You really should learn how to do it yourself." "Why?" Andy asked. "Because I don't want to do it every time you end up wanting to put on makeup." Andy shook his head. "It's just this one time, and one day at Claire's, if I get the job. That's what all the boys say." "What boys?" Andy asked as he began to wonder if his girlfriend had done this before with her ex-boyfriends. "The pretty boys," Serena replied with a smile as she put his hair up into a ponytail. Andy decided to let the issue go since he knew all of Serena's former boyfriends. He knew that neither she nor any of them had ever talked about doing anything like what Serena was asking him to do. While he knew that that could just be embarrassment on the guy's parts, he also knew that if she had dressed them up, Serena had kept quiet about it. Serena directed Andy as he applied his eyeliner. He stabbed himself in the eye when he tried to put into around his left eye. Andy became a little aggravated when Serena started to laugh at his clumsy attempt to apply it. She apologized and told him to apply it slowly. Andy complied with her recommendation and finished applying his eyeliner without further incident. Andy then took hold of the mascara. He carefully followed Serena's instructions while he applied it. With his mascara finished, Andy moved on to his lip gloss. He paused before he applied. He stared at his reflection and saw that the ponytail and the black around his eyes had already given him a decidedly feminine appearance. Andy gazed at himself for a few more moments before Serena slapped his shoulder and said, "Stop ogling yourself. Self-love is a deadly sin, I think." Andy blushed and applied the pink lip gloss his girlfriend had given to him. Andy slowly put the lip gloss applicator back into the bottle and placed it into the purse that Serena lent him. He could not believe how convincing a woman he was. He knew that he was never masculine looking, but he never realized how effeminate his face and overall build was. Serena smiled as she stared down at him and said, "There's the pretty face I fell in love with." Andy blushed at her words once more. He knew that his effeminate looks contributed to Serena's attraction to him. Although he knew it, his male ego never let him be comfortable with that fact. He had always felt he should have been more masculine, even though he knew that if he was, he never would have secured Serena's love. Serena gave him a good look and said, "Wait, I know what we need to complete this look." "What?" Andy asked as Serena went through her jewelry box. She pulled out a pair of earrings and handed them to Andy. Andy examined the earrings. They were heart-shaped earrings decorated with rhinestones. He put the earrings on. He smiled as he looked at them in the mirror. He liked how they helped give his pierced ears a feminine look that went with the rest of his appearance. He laughed as he looked at his girlish-looking ears and thought about his father. He had his ears pierced simply to annoy his father when he came down to visit him. He knew his father considered it unmanly for a male to have 2 pierced ears. He could only laugh about what his father would think if he saw him at that moment. Serena then handed Andy a pair of open-back, black wedges. He placed them on and stood up and walked around a bit to see if he could master walking in them in a short time. He realized he could, and he told Serena that he could walk with them on. With his feminizing makeover complete, Andy took hold of the purse Serena had made up for him. It contained her social security card in addition to his phone, wallet, and the makeup she was lending him. Serena smiled at Andy and said, "Well, I guess you're not backing out of the bet." "Hell, no, babe. I'm not backing out. With the way I look, I've got nothing to fear." Serena shook her head and asked, "Am I going to have to worry about you dressing up all the time now?" Andy froze. He wondered if she realized how much he was enjoying himself. He thought to himself, maybe she's picking up on something about me. However, when he saw her smile, Andy realized that Serena was probably just playing with his head. Andy followed Serena out to her car. While he had a license of his own, he figured it would not do him any good while he was en femme. Serena understood his fear of being pulled over by the police en femme. She knew he would have to show his male license. She was also as aware as Andy about how homophobic many police officers were. She knew that if they found out that he was a man beneath his girl's clothing, they would give him a hard time. Serena drove Andy down to the Claire's diner 2 towns over. They saw the help wanted signs still in the window. Serena parked and said, "I'll be waiting for you in the shopping center next door. If I'm not in my car when you get out, I'll be in that Duane Reade." Andy nodded as he got out of Serena's car. He walked towards the door and watched her pull out of the parking lot before she pulled into the shopping center's lot. He opened the door to the diner and inquired about the opening. Andy was given an application to fill out. He filled out the application using Serena's biographical information. He smiled as he put her name, address, sex, and social security number down on the paper. He knew that if he got the job, he would be technically working Serena's first job. He knew that his girlfriend had no work experience. Her well-to-do parents did not want her to cut back on her studies to work a low-wage job. They provided everything she wanted, so she saw no reason to have one. Andy could relate as his mother had kept him from having a job for the same reasons. She too gave him almost everything he wanted. He smirked at the fact that even though he was technically working before Serena ever had, she was going to be getting the credit for his work. Andy was taken into the manager's office after he finished with the application. Andy was seated across from the manager. She was a woman in her mid-30s with long blonde hair. She introduced herself as Lauren before she looked at Andy's resume. She nodded to herself a few times before she looked over Andy and asked him a few questions. Satisfied with his answers and his physical appearance, she said, "Welcome aboard, Serena." "I got the job?" Andy exclaimed. "Yes, you did," Lauren replied as she extended her hand. Andy shook her hand and said, "When do I start?" "How about tomorrow at 4? Andy nodded and said, "Great, I will see you then." Lauren nodded and said, "See Carrie up front about getting a uniform." Andy nodded as he got up and headed out of Lauren's office. He went over to Carrie and asked about a uniform. Carrie took him into the back room of the diner and gave him 2 uniforms in his size and a hat. She then fitted him for a pair of white roller skates to make sure that they had enough ones in his size for his shift. Carrie told him that he had to get his own white socks and could wear nude pantyhose if he wanted to for added warmth. Andy nodded and thanked her as he walked out of the diner carrying his new uniform and hat. He walked over into the adjacent parking lot, and he found Serena waiting in her car for him. He told her he got the job and showed her the red and white vertically striped dress with the white apron that he would be required to wear the next day. Serena smiled at him and looked at the hat. She said, "You're going to look precious in that." "Oh, thanks," Andy replied, blushing yet again at his girlfriend's words. Serena then told him that she had picked up socks and nude pantyhose for him. He asked why she was so certain he would get the job. She answered that Claire's would jump to hire a girl that looked like him. He smiled at her statement, although he was a little uncomfortable being called an attractive girl by his girlfriend even though she did not say that directly. As Andy took hold of the bag she had gotten from Dwayne Reed, Serena started the car. She drove back to her house. Andy changed out of Serena's clothes, removed his makeup and left before her mother came home. Andy went to Serena's after school the next day. She let him and helped him change into his uniform. Andy put on his panties in the bathroom before he went to Serena's room and listened as she told him how to put on his pantyhose without running them. Andy followed her directions closely and rolled down the pantyhose like she said before he stepped into them and slowly brought the pantyhose up his legs. Andy smiled as he brought the pantyhose up his leg. They felt sensual and like nothing else that he had ever worn. He felt turned on by their soft, silky feeling and wondered why men did not wear them. After he finished putting on his pantyhose, Andy placed on his socks before Serena helped him put a bra on. He stuffed the bra with Serena's socks while she took out the purse she was lending him again. She started taking out the cosmetics while he put on his uniform. Serena smirked at him as she saw him standing in her bedroom in a car hop's uniform. Andy pulled at the mid-thigh length dress, but he quickly realized that that would not make it any longer. "Love the apron, babe," Serena said about the white apron that Andy wrapped around his dress to complete the uniform. Andy rolled his eyes and put on the pair of cheap girls' sneakers that Serena had bought for him. He then went to Serena's vanity and applied his makeup. When he finished, he felt that there was no one outside of Serena's bedroom who could possibly know that he was really a man in a dress. He then placed on his waitress hat and asked, "How do I look?" "Super cute," Serena replied as she hugged him. She kissed him on the cheek. Andy hoped it would go further then, but Serena got up and said, "Come on, girl. You've got to get moving. You don't want to be late for your first day of work, do you?" Andy shook his head as he replied with a smile, "No, I wouldn't want that." Serena then drove Andy back to Claire's. She let him out and wished him good luck. He thanked her and went inside after pausing to let a car hop pass him on her way to a customer's car. Carrie was working again and told Andy to get ready in the back room. He did so and put on the white roller skates after he took off his shoes and put them on the side alongside the other waitress's shoes and pocketbooks. Andy skated out of the back room and out the diner's front door. He waited by the pickup window for the first meal he was to deliver. When he saw the order come to the window, Andy picked it up and skated to the waiting car. Andy felt the slight breeze going up the skirt of his dress as he rolled to the car. It made him feel a little cold as he rolled up to the car. He was happy to be wearing pantyhose, which he felt were at least keeping him a little warmer than he would have otherwise been. The older man in the car smiled at Andy as he took the bag from Andy's hand. Andy smiled back and said, "Here you are, sir." "Thank you, miss," the man replied. As Andy rolled back to the pickup window, he turned back towards the man and caught him checking out his legs. While Andy was a little disturbed by the fact that he was being ogled by a man, he could not help but be a little turned on by the fact. Andy liked feeling desirable, even if he had no interest in the person that desired him. The feeling of desirability that Andy felt was not the only source of his pleasure during his shift. Even though Andy's legs got a little tired as the shift went on, he could not help but continually be aroused by the feeling of his pantyhose on his smooth legs. It embarrassed Andy to some extent. Even though he was tucked away, Andy was not sure if his member might end up poking out at the back of his dress. That fear did little to calm him down. Andy did not know why, but the potential of that exposure excited him as well. However, Andy was confident that no one would be able to discover his true sex. As he went from car to car delivering orders, he never got a suspicious look. The patrons just smiled at him and took their food. A few gave him some suggestive looks, but Andy continued to revel in that as continued proof that he had an unambiguously feminine appearance. Andy's certainty came to an end when he recognized a patron he was handing an order to. The patron was a fellow student at his high school. The classmate was there with his girlfriend. Andy pretended to not recognize them as he started to shake. He skated away from them, looked back and realized that they had not realized who he really was. Andy felt at ease as they pulled out of the lot, not bothering to even give him a look as they left. He was aroused by the fact that he had passed as a girl with people he knew, but he was also aware that he could not risk bringing a meal to another familiar face. Andy knew that he would have to be on the lookout for those people. He decided that he would have to pretend tie his roller skate or fake an injury to make sure that he did not bring food to those he knew. As his shift went on, Andy heard his first come on as a girl. Andy peered into the car stuffed with 5 teenage boys as the driver told Andy that he had pretty legs. Andy blushed at the compliment and thanked him. "Oh, she's got a smoky voice," a boy in the back seat said. The driver's eyebrows rose for a second as he nodded to the boy with a smile. The driver then asked, "Are you a parking ticket, because you've got fine written all over you?" Andy rolled his eyes at the driver as he handed him his bags of food. Andy then turned and went to roll away, but the driver cried out, "Don't be like that, baby. It's just that you're so fine you make me stutter. What's your name?" Andy shook his head with a smile and said, "Are the patron saint of bad pick-up lines or something?" "No, baby. My lines are rock solid just like me," the driver answered. Andy skated back to the window and did not leave it until the boy drove his car out of the parking lot. Another car hop smirked at Andy as she saw the boys leave and said, "You handled that better than me. I would have thrown that Dick's drink in his face." Andy smirked and went back to work. He delivered a few more meals without issue. Midway through his shift, Andy went on break. He had ordered food from the diner and took it into the back room to eat. After he finished, he came back out and started the second half of his shift. Not long after that, Serena pulled into the parking lot. Andy smirked at her as he saw her pull up. She placed an order and waited for one of the car hops to bring it. Andy pretended his skate had become untied so that he could time it to make sure that he took her order over. Andy picked up Serena's order and skated over to Serena's car. She smirked at him and said, "Looking good, doll." "I bet you say that to all the girls," Andy replied as a smile came upon his face. "I think you're the prettiest girl out here," Serena responded. "Well, there's only 2 other car hops on duty. It's a small field of competition," Andy countered. "Just take the compliment, bitch," Serena retorted with a smirk. "I'm the bitch, now, Serena?" Andy asked as he leaned in towards her car as she took the meal from his hand. "You're my bitch," Serena answered in a coo. Andy stared down at his car hop uniform and felt that he could not deny that at that moment. He nodded in response and said, "Well, remember, babe, you're mine every day for a week because of this." Serena grinned and said, "I'm looking forward to it." They talked a little longer before Serena pulled out of the diner's parking lot. Andy then skated back to the pickup window. Unknown to Andy, Lauren was standing within earshot of Serena's car while she was smoking a cigarette. She heard Andy call her Serena and noticed his apparent rapport with the girl. She realized that they were exchanging loving looks. Serena began to realize that something about Andy's claimed identity was not adding up. She walked inside wondering what was going on. That's when she saw a girl say to another girl, "Isn't that Serena Davis over there?" "Where?" the other patron responded. "Over there? I think that's her car." Lauren realized that they were talking about the girl Andy was talking to in the car and not her car hop. She walked over to the table and asked how the girls knew Serena. They explained that they used to be friends with her when they danced together at a dance studio when they were younger and occasionally saw each other through a mutual friend. Lauren gave the girls the address Andy had given her on his application. The girls said that was where Serena lived. Lauren asked, "Do you recognize the car hop out there with her?" They shook their heads and one girl answered, "She looks like she might be another girl from our dance class, but I'm not sure." Lauren grinned and told the girls to enjoy their meals. She then walked towards her office with an ear-to-ear grin upon her face. She could not wait to talk to Andy when she got a chance. As Andy's shift ended, Lauren called him into her office. Andy wondered if he had done anything wrong. He did not really care if he did because he planned to quit after he picked up his stuff from the back room. Lauren told Andy to take a seat. She smiled and said, "Serena, I've discovered something about you I find most intriguing." "What's that?" Andy asked as he started to wonder if his disguise was not as convincing as he thought. "Well, I overheard you talking with this girl a few hours ago." "Oh," Andy replied as he began to sweat. "Yes, apparently, she's known as Serena too." "Lots of girls are," Andy responded. "That's true, but when I heard a patron point to her and say there's Serena Davis. That's the same name as you, so I kind of got suspicious about why you were so chummy with her as you brought her meal." Andy started to shake. Lauren leaned towards and said, "I went and looked up the address you gave, and then I went over and asked the girl if the Serena Davis she had seen lived where you said you did." "And do you know what she said?" Andy shook his head. Lauren replied, "She said she was." "So let's cut the crap. You're not Serena Davis, are you, dear?" "No, I'm not," Andy admitted. "You're Andy Iverson, aren't you?" "How did you know that?" Andy shrieked. "I went through your pocketbook, dear. I found your ID. That's got to be illegal." "Maybe it is, but you know what is illegal, my dear boy? Giving a false name on an application. You stole Serena Davis's identity." "No. I had her permission. I didn't steal it." "Maybe you didn't, but you still passed yourself as someone you're not. That's a crime in this state. We take this stuff very seriously here, boy." "It's not like that." "Well, you can tell it to the police when they arrive." "Oh, by the way, I think your cellmates in lockup are going to love you having a boy with legs like yours overnight." "Please don't call the cops," Andy begged. Lauren smirked and said, "Maybe we can work something out." "You name it." "I'll do it," Andy said in haste. "Good. I want you to keep working here. Like this," Andy said as he pointed to his dress. "Of course, we can't have a car hop looking any different from the others. We have a regional brand to maintain." "Why?" Andy asked. "I know how spoiled kids from your neighborhood are, Andy. I think a little hard work in a dress will do you some good. It might teach you something about the real world." "That's why you want me to do this?" "Well, that and I was toyed with by a rich boy from your town not unlike you. He treated me like trash because I wasn't rich. I guess I just want to get my revenge on one of you." "I'm not like that. All of you up there are like that. You like to toy with us poor people and throw us out when you've used up." Andy knew there was no point in fighting her. He figured he could just leave and never come back and get away with it. It would just be he said she said if she did not call the cops then, he figured. Andy replied, "Okay, you got me. I'll do it." "Wonderful," Lauren replied before she pulled out a camera and took a few pictures. "What are you doing?" Andy asked. "Getting evidence, Andy. I've learned you can't pin anything on a guy like you unless you've got concrete evidence." "You think that's enough to get the cops to prosecute me with?" "Oh, no, Andy. I think it's enough to send them to your parents, anonymously pointing out how you worked as a car hop." Andy froze as he thought about his mother finding out what he had done. He would be embarrassed if she saw him dressed as a female. He looked at Lauren and asked, "When's my next shift?" "Tomorrow at 4 again. Don't be late, or I'll send the pictures." Andy nodded and headed out her door. He went into the back room and took off his roller skates. He put his sneakers back on and picked up his purse. He checked its contents to make sure Lauren had not stolen anything. After that, he headed out into the parking lot to wait for Serena to pick him up. She came by a few minutes later and saw his dejected appearance. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Serena asked, "What happened?" Andy explained what had occurred. Serena was rendered silent by the news. She pulled into an empty parking lot where Andy could change and take off his makeup. As she stopped the car, she looked at Andy and said, "I'm so sorry, Andy. I wouldn't have made this bet if I knew this would happen. I know. I'm not mad at you. I know you didn't know it was against the law. It is what is though. I'll just have to get through this." Serena nodded and said, "Don't worry, Andy. I'll be here to help you. Whatever you need, just tell me." Andy thanked her as he entered her back seat and took off his dress and bra. He slipped on his male clothes over his pantyhose because he did not want to strip naked in a parking lot. Serena joined him in the back seat and removed the makeup from his face. They then put Andy's uniform into a bag in the trunk and drove back to Serena's home. Andy picked up his car, which was parked down the road, and he drove home. His mother asked how Serena was. He said she was fine before he told her that he would be spending the next night with her as well. Andy's mother was not happy about him being out again with Serena during the school week, but she decided not to prevent him from doing it. Andy continued working 4 days a week at Claire's Diner for the following 2 weeks. The shifts were all like his first one. The work never really varied. He spent his time rolling around the parking lot trying to make sure that his cover was not blown. More than a few times, he had to fake injuries so that other waitresses would bring meals to his friends' and schoolmates' cars. None of them ever noticed that he was among the waitresses, and Andy believed that was because they had not gotten close to him. Andy also did not like the fact that his employment had cut into his time with Serena. While they maintained a sexual relationship, he knew that Serena was more than willing to give herself to him more if he had the time. Andy knew how much seeing him dressed turned her on, but he was only able to have relations with her 3 days a week at most because of his work restrictions. Andy, however, found reasons to enjoy his job. He liked the constant fear of exposure. The fact that he was not found out aroused him as well. He was turned on by the fact that he was so passable. He also loved the feeling of his clothing. Every time he put on his pantyhose, Andy felt turned on by the sensations he felt on his legs. Andy also enjoyed his paychecks. While they came in his girlfriend's name, Serena cashed them for him and gave him the money. Andy liked having his own source of money for the first time in his life, even though he failed to spend a dime of it. Andy also found himself growing increasingly comfortable working as a car hop. He did not see any problem living part-time as a girl. Lauren noticed this and decided to push him a little further. She called him into her office to talk during a break on his shift. Lauren smiled at Andy as he took a seat across from her desk. "Do you know why I called you in here, Serena?" Lauren asked. Andy shook his head before Lauren responded, "I have a new job for you to do." "What's that?" Andy asked, afraid of her answer. "I need you to go to a school dance with my nephew." "What? You can't be serious. You're taking this too far." "Oh, I'm very serious, Serena. You will be going to his dance or else I'll be calling the cops." "It's entirely your choice though." Andy pouted and asked, "When and where?" "He goes to school in Springfield. You can meet him at my house there on Friday." "What do I have to do with him?" "Nothing but show up looking pretty. I know you're good at that, dear. The boy is dateless for the dance. I just want him to have a girl on his arm for once to alleviate some abuse. He knows all about you, so don't worry about him trying to score." Andy felt a little relieved by her statement. He knew that while Lauren was asking a lot from him, it was not as bad as getting arrested. He nodded and said, "I'll be there. Just give me the address." Lauren gave Andy her address. As he turned to walk out of the office, she added, "Oh, and go get yourself a nice dress. I don't want my nephew showing up to a school dance with some cheap-looking like tart." Andy nodded to her and walked out her office, sulking. He finished up his shift and called Serena to tell her what had happened. She tried to make him feel better about what he was going to do, but she knew it was fruitless. They then made plans to go shopping the next day for heels and possibly a dress. Andy went to Serena's house the next day. It was one of Andy's days off from work, so there were few time restrictions on their activities. Serena let him into her house and opened up her closet doors. He tried on all of Serena's dresses, but not one of them fit him correctly. She only had a couple of dresses, and she wore them tighter than she wore the rest of her clothing. Andy realized that he would have to buy a dress as well as heels to go with them because he did not fit into any of Serena's heeled shoes. After realizing that Andy needed to buy a dress, Serena shrugged and asked him where he wanted to shop for one. He told her to surprise him as she began to get dressed in the clothes he had interviewed for his car hop position in. Serena then drove him to the mall. They entered the mall and headed into a boutique to find a dress for the informal school dance. Serena looked through the racks with Andy. They both knew their choices were limited because their selection had to be one that did not show cleavage. Andy selected a dress and showed it to Serena. It was a white long-sleeved dress. Serena shook her head and said, "You're too sloppy a drinking and eater to wear white." Andy asked, "What would you wear?" Serena looked through the racks and selected a bright red sweater dress. Andy looked it over and thought about how he would look in it. It had 3/4 sleeves, with a scoop neckline and a ruched, drawstring bottom. Andy thought the dress was very pretty, and it was with his price range. He stepped into the changing room and slipped the dress on over his head. He came out and showed the body-hugging dress off to Serena. Serena marveled at Andy's appearance. She loved how the dress showed off his frame. Andy stared at Serena as he waited for her to say something. Serena then broke her silence and said, "You look really hot in that." "Thanks," Andy mumbled. Serena shook her head and continued, "I really can't believe how good that looks on you." Andy blushed and said, "I guess I should pick out another dress then. I don't want to give the boy the wrong idea." "No. You have to get that dress," Serena exclaimed. Andy shrugged and replied, "Fine." Serena grinned at his acquiescence. She planned on him wearing that dress many times in the future. They then walked over to the shoe department. Andy and Serena searched for the perfect pair of shoes to go with the dress. Andy settled on a pair of closed-toe, sling-back, red heels. The shoes had a 4-inch heel and a 1-inch platform. Serena shook her head as she looked at them and said, "They're cute, but they are going to kill you as the night goes on." Andy brushed aside her concern and decided to buy the shoes. He walked up to the register with his purchases. He then paid the large amount in cash as Serena looked on. Andy felt a little bothered by the fact that he was spending virtually all of his 2 paychecks on a dress and heels that he thought he would never wear again. Serena laughed at his complaint and said, "A lot of girls pay a fortune for dresses they only wear once." "I'm not really like them," Andy reminded Serena. Serena nodded slowly as the cashier gave Andy his receipt. Andy then followed Serena out of the mall and to her car. On the day of the dance, Andy prepared himself in Serena's house. Andy first placed on a pair of black tights that Serena had bought for him. He then placed on his bra before he slipped the dress over his head. Serena watched Andy intently as he applied his makeup. She stared longingly at the picture of femininity she saw emerging before her eyes. As he finished, Serena walked towards him and began to style his hair. She brushed out his hair and gave him a side ponytail. She pulled all of his hair to one side and tied the hair up in a low ponytail with a small elastic band. She then secured the other half of his hair with pins. As she finished with his hair, Serena went and took a pair of earrings from her jewelry box. She secured the dangling, gold, wire, teardrop earrings into his ears as he watched her in the mirror. Serena smiled down at him as she finished. She wanted him then for herself. She was pained by the fact that he was going to be on someone else's arm that night. Before he stood up, she whispered in Andy's ear, "You look really hot, babe. My parents are out of town tonight, so be prepared for me to tear that dress off of you when you come back later." Andy smirked at her and picked up his heels and the small, black purse Serena had filled for Andy while he was getting dressed. He carried the heels towards her front door and put them on before he stepped outside. Not wanting Serena to see him going on a date with a boy, he told her that he would drive himself to Lauren's. Serena asked if he was sure, and he replied that he was. Andy took care to make sure that he followed every rule of the road he was aware of as he drove to Lauren's home. He felt a surge of relief as he pulled up in front of it without being pulled over by the police. He stared at her house for a few moments before he got up the nerve to get out of the car and walk up to her door. Lauren opened the door as she saw Andy approaching the house. She stared at him with a look of mild surprise before she let him in. "You look good, Serena," Lauren said as she looked him over. Her sister, Eve, seconded the opinion. Andy looked around for Eve's son, but Andy did not see him. Lauren informed him that the boy was in the bathroom. Vern came out of the bathroom a minute later. Andy glanced at the 5 feet 9 inches boy with pimples covering his face. Vern looked back at Andy and asked, "This is the sissy you got me, Aunt Lauren?" "This will be a long night," Andy thought to himself as he shook his head at Vern's words. "Yes, Vern. This is him. Quite pretty for a sissy, don't you think?" "Whatever you say," Vern replied, not wanting to admit that he found another boy attractive. "Are you both ready to go?" Eve asked. Vern and Andy responded with nods. Andy then followed Eve and Vern to Eve's car. Vern got into the passenger's seat, and Andy sat in the back seat of Eve's car. Eve drove them to the school, and she let them out and told him that she would be back at 9 to pick them up. Vern looked at the school door before he turned towards Andy and asked, "Ready, Pansy?" Andy sneered at him, prompting Vern to smile. He took Andy by the hand and led him into the gymnasium that was being utilized for the dance. Andy tried to look happy as Vern dragged him around the dance and introduced him as his girlfriend from out of town. The boys and girls that Vern talked to seemed surprised the girl actually existed. Andy was happy that Vern never tried to demonstrate affection with him, but Andy felt increasingly uncomfortable as he stood beside him. As he followed Vern around the gym, Andy's feet began to bother him as the first hour of the dance had passed. He began to realize that he had made a terrible mistake not listening to his girlfriend's advice on footwear. He got a brief reprieve from standing when the food was brought out. Vern and Andy went over and made themselves plates and sat at a table with Vern's friends. Vern's friends asked Andy a number of questions about himself. Andy made up lies to satisfy them. Vern smiled as his friends' girlfriends complimented his date's appearance. That smile left his face when one of Vern's male friends asked Andy, "What is a pretty girl like you doing with him?" Andy was silent as he tried to think of a reason given that Vern was not rich and was not well endowed as far as he knew. Vern answered for Andy, "It's because I'm charming, asshole." Andy nodded slowly and looked away from Vern's friends. Vern then put his arm around Andy to advertise their relationship to onlookers. Andy felt uncomfortable with Vern's arm around him, but he knew he was in no position to say anything. After they finished eating, Vern decided it was time to drag Andy onto the dance floor to show off his moves to impress the ladies. They danced together to some fast dance songs. Their mutual lack of natural rhythm made some people snicker around them. Andy was well aware that he was a poor dancer. Vern was under the belief that his poorly timed, thrusting dance motions were trendy. Andy struggled to keep a straight face as he watched Vern dance. His amusement was the only source of pleasure for him as his feet began to ache even more. By the time a slow song came on, Andy's feet and ankles felt like they were having pins shoved into them. Vern moved close to Andy as the song began. Andy felt uncomfortable as he put his head on Vern's shoulder as Vern's hand went around Andy's back. "What do you think of the music?" Vern asked as they danced. "Hang the DJ," Andy answered. Vern smiled as his hand slid down to Andy's rear. "A little higher," Andy responded with a sneer. Vern smirked and moved his hands up Andy's back. As the dance continued, Andy felt something unusual grinding against him. He realized what it was and glanced up at Vern appalled. Vern blushed and frantically whispered, "It's the softness of your dress, I swear." Please don't tell my mom. Why Andy was prepared at that moment to announce that he was really a man and that Vern was a sissy lover just to spite the boy, he decided that he could use Vern's ill-timed erection to make the rest of the night more palatable for him. Andy smirked at him when the song ended and led him off the floor. Andy pulled him over to a corner and said, "You don't touch me for the rest of the night, and I'll keep your little boner problem to myself. Got it?" Vern nodded and said, "I promise, I won't touch you again. Just don't tell my mother. She already thinks I'm weird. I'll never live this down." Andy nodded and excused himself to go to the bathroom. He headed for the girls' room. He looked around as he waited on the line to use the stalls. He never had been in a girls' bathroom in school before. He looked at its pink-colored walls and stalls, and he realized that it was cleaner than the boys' bathrooms at his school. After he finished in the bathroom, Andy returned to the dance. Vern kept his promise as the dance continued. Andy watched the clock from the table while he sat beside Vern as the minutes clicked away. The minute 9 o'clock came, Andy jumped to his aching feet and rushed for the exit with Vern. He got into Eve's waiting car, and he felt relieved the night had ended. Eve asked how the dance was, and Vern gave the response as Andy took off his heels and massaged his feet in the back of Eve's car. Eve dropped Andy off at Lauren's. She was waiting for him when they arrived. She smirked at him through the window as Eve and Vern left. Andy put his head down and got into his car. He drove to Serena's home slowly. He figured the last thing he needed was to be pulled over after the night he had had. He pulled up in front of Serena's house and walked up to her door. Serena met him at the door dressed in lingerie. Andy felt slightly better about the night as he followed Serena to her room. Serena was then true to her word. She pulled off his dress, pulled down his tights and made love to him. The next day, Andy went back to work at Claire's diner. As he worked, he thought about the night before. As much as he hated how attractive he was to men, he was happy about how it made his girlfriend feel. She had given him the best sex of his life the night before. As he thought about how much he loved the feeling of his feminine clothes and how they seemed to increase Serena's sex drive, he figured that living as a girl part-time was worth the occasional pain of heels and the looks he got from men. As Andy brought a meal out to a car with those distracting thoughts in his brain, he heard a familiar voice. "Andy," he heard his mother shriek from the car he was standing next to. He quickly looked around to make sure that no one had heard his mother's voice. When he realized that no one seemed to, he turned back towards his seething mother. "Mom, I can explain," Andy said. "Explain what?" "How you kept that you got job from me. How you must have been lying about where you've been going. Or about why you're dressed up like male eye candy?" Isabel asked her son. "Yes, Mom. I can explain it all. Just listen." "I'll listen when you get home," Isabel interjected as she ripped the bag out of Andy's hands and pulled out of her parking spot as fast as she could. Andy skated back towards the building that slow workday with a slack jaw. He then saw Lauren smiling at him as he skated towards her. She walked towards him and put up her hand. She smiled and said, "I see Mommy found about you." "Yes," Andy replied as he hung his head. "Well, I think you've been punished enough." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're fired without cause. We just don't have enough shifts for everyone we hired, and you're the most logical choice to let go given your initial deceit, Serena. Give back the skates, you can keep the uniforms." Andy nodded as he went inside and took off his skates. He put on his sneakers and collected his belongings. He then called his girlfriend to pick him up. Serena came down right away and brought him back to her place so he could pick up his car. Serena offered to let him change back into his male clothes inside, but he explained to her that how he was dressed no longer mattered. As Andy walked towards his car, he began to feel uneasy about what awaited him at home. He figured that his mother was going to kill him. The only thing that helped ease his nerves was the fact that Serena had promised to follow him home to be there when he talked with his mother. Andy was also unsure of how he felt about losing his job. He enjoyed working there, even though he constantly feared exposure. That was part of the thrill of the job for him though. He liked the forbidden aspect of what he was doing almost as much as he enjoyed the feeling of his feminine clothes and staring at his girlish appearance in the mirror. Serena followed Andy out the door as he left to go home. She followed a car length behind him as he drove towards his house. She parked in front of his house as he came to a stop in the driveway. Andy waited for her to reach him before he took a step towards the house. He did not care that he was standing in his driveway in a dress. The significance of his cross-dressing seemed to be gone for him. He took Serena's hand and walked up to the door and went inside. He found his mother waiting for him in the living room. Isabel looked at her son and Serena and said, "Come in here and explain yourself, young man." Serena put her hand on Andy's shoulder as he walked over towards his mother. He took a seat beside her and told her everything. When he finished, his mother shook her head and told him, "You're an idiot. Blackmail is just as illegal as fraud. You didn't have to go on that date." Andy was a little surprised that she did not seem upset about his cross-dressing. He asked, "You're not upset about the fact that I was working in a dress?" Isabel shrieked, "I'm very upset with you, Andrew. I'm upset that you lied to me. I always felt we had an open relationship. I never discouraged you about anything. I never said cut your hair. I never told you to try to bulk up. All I ever did was encourage you to come to me with anything." "I know, Mom, sorry," Andy responded as he realized how angry she was at him given her use of his given name. "You should be. You could have come to me with this. I could have gotten you out of Claire's in a second if you had come to me. I can't believe that you kept it from me. We've always had an open relationship with each other. I can't fathom why you felt that this had to be the time to end that." Andy sat silently. Isabel's eyes then drifted to Serena. She was sure that Serena was the reason that her son had become more secretive. As nice as she thought Serena was, Isabel did not want to look at her at the moment. Serena realized this and told Andy that she had to go and would talk to him later. Serena kissed Andy on the cheek as she went to leave the house. With Serena gone, Andy clasped his mother's hands and apologized for keeping his job and cross-dressing a secret from her. Isabel smiled down at her son and put her arm around him. She then whispered, "I forgive you, Andy." Andy was relieved to hear her not refer to him by his given name. He wondered if she would not hold it against him, but Isabel then added, "Now, go get yourself ready for a day of shopping with Mom." "What?" Andy asked as his mother pointed to a bag in the kitchen that was visible from the couch. Andy looked at his mother and asked, "What's in the bag?" "Your punishment clothes, dear." "Punishment?" Andy asked. "Oh, yes. I can't have you thinking that you can sneak around and not have any consequences for your actions." "What do you have in mind?" Andy asked as he walked towards the kitchen and saw that the bag was from Guess. Isabel answered, "Well, I always wanted a daughter, and after seeing you in your car hop uniform, I just couldn't help myself." "What did you do?" Andy inquired as he began to breathe faster. "I just got you a few little things that will enable you to give me the part-time daughter I want." "Part-time daughter?" "Oh, yes, dear. I think you're going to better than the real thing too. I can shop with you and dress you up, and I won't have to deal with you PMSing or getting pregnant. You can give me all the benefits of having a daughter with none of the burdens." Andy started to shake as he wondered if his male life as he knew it was coming to end. He knew that he would still be dressing around his girlfriend. It now seemed to him that his mother intended to make him her doll as well for entirely different reasons. Andy hesitantly walked over to the bag that rested on the kitchen counter. He put his right hand into the bag and looked inside. He started to sweat a little as he saw the miniskirt with a sheer, 3-layered, ruffle bottom. The primarily black skirt was decorated with a floral print of pink, white, and yellow flowers. As Andy picked it up and looked at it, his mother remarked, "I knew that was perfect for you after I saw your legs in your pantyhose, sweetie." You've got legs that practically require a skirt like that." Although his mother's compliment made him feel slightly better about himself, the hemline was shorter than his car hop dresses. As he gauged its length, he realized that its hemline would fall only midway down his thighs. He knew that he would feel exposed wearing it. Andy knew, however, that airing out his objections would not make his life any easier. Thus, he kept his mouth shut as he placed the skirt down on the counter and put his hand back into the bag to pull out the top that was resting on a shoebox. Andy looked over the gray, graphic t-shirt in his hand. It contained a picture of a woman in a red corset who was surrounded by black stars. The word "Guess" was written in big gold letters above the girl. The shirt had cuff sleeves, a scoop neckline and rhinestone and glitter details. Andy was unhappy about the eye-catching colors on the shirt, but he knew that if his mother had taken it as far as she had, he might end up wearing a red corset for a top himself if he complained about the shirt. He placed the shirt down on top of his skirt in silence before he pulled out the shoebox. Andy opened the box up with trepidation. He feared that his mother had purchased him sky-high heels. He remembered the pain he felt at the dance and figured he was going to experience it again. Andy felt a wave of relief pour over him as he looked at its contents. The box contained a pair of brown, flat sandals with faceted crystal detail on the braided, black thong straps. He was relieved that she had purchased him footwear that he would have no trouble walking in. Andy also noticed that box also contained a smaller box that had stuck in between the sandals. He took out the small box and opened it. He found a pair of rhinestone-covered hoop earrings. He knew that they would attract unwanted attention, but he figured that at least it was the last of his mother's surprise clothing and accessories for him. That was until she said, "I hope you like all my gifts for you." "I do," Andy lied. "Great, because I've got 2 more for you." "Oh, wonderful," Andy managed to say through a forced smile. His mother walked past him and pulled another bag out from the dining room hutch. She reached in and handed Andy another small box. He hesitantly took it from her. He wondered what other eye-catching thing she had bought for him to go out in public with. He opened the box and saw the triple-layer necklace in the box. He found the silver-toned chained necklace to be pretty, but he knew that its 3 charms would attract further attention. The first charm was a silver-toned Guess logo, while the second was a large denim heart surrounded by silver. It was the third charm that he knew would attract the most attention though. It was a rhinestone-decorated charm reading "Love." Andy thanked her as convincingly as he could. Isabel laughed at his attempt. She knew that he was not happy about having to wear anything she had bought for him in public. She smiled though at the fact that he had not resisted anything she had gotten him yet. It told her that he truly wanted to make amends with her. Isabel then handed Andy his bag. Andy looked over the gray, crocodile print, box handbag. It had silver-tone hardware with a rhinestone-decorated charm and logo. Andy thanked her and went and emptied the bag he borrowed from Serena into the bag his mother had bought for him. Andy then looked silently over his new feminine possessions for a minute. Isabel broke his stupor and said, "Well, go get dressed, Faith." "Faith?" "Well, yes, Faith. I don't think you want me calling you Andy when we're in the mall, do you?" "I will if you'd like. I mean, Andy's girly sounding enough, but I figured you wouldn't want to risk bystanders attaching the name to your pretty face." "That's okay. Faith's good, Mom," Andy responded in haste. "That's my girl. Now, go get dressed." Andy nodded slowly and collected his new belongings. He carried them into his room, took off Serena's earrings and stripped out of his car hop uniform. He then placed on another pair of panties he got from Serena to give himself extra support in the hope that his member would remain tucked despite the absence of his control top pantyhose. Andy then put on his skirt and top. He then took hold of the makeup and went into the bathroom. He freshened up his makeup there and tied his hair back in a to the side ponytail. After that, he went back into his bedroom to put on his new earrings and necklace. He then paused and looked at himself in his full-length mirror. Andy looked at the teenage girl looking back at him. He looked like many of his female classmates. He was not among the best-looking ones, but he would surely not be among the worst-looking either. Having seen himself dressed as a girl before, he was not that surprised. He knew that he was passable the moment that he first saw himself after Serena made him over. However, he had never worn anything as flattering yet casual as the clothes his mother had bought. Andy realized that he might be better looking than he initially thought. When he saw himself in his car hop uniform, a dress, or in women's jeans, he thought he looked average. However, with the short skirt showing off his legs and the tight shirt showing off his slender upper body, he felt that he looked better than the average girl. He smiled and said to himself, "I hope Serena's not at the mall or else she might get jealous." Andy caught himself and shook his head as he thought, "I can't keep thinking things like that. I might fall in love with myself if I do." A sudden thought then entered Andy's mind. He wondered if his mother planned to expose him as a cross-dresser at the mall. Andy shook his head as he continued to think about his mother's possible plans. As he checked his makeup and his hair, Andy continued to wonder if going shopping with her was simply her punishment or whether she was going to do something else to him. He went over to his bed and picked up the handbag his mother had left there for him. He placed the makeup she gave him into it. He ran his tongue over his lip gloss and brushed his fingers through his ponytail a little before he took hold of his sandals. Andy then slid his feet into his sandals before he turned and exited his bedroom. Isabel watched as her son walked towards her dressed in the clothes she had purchased him. She smirked at how feminine he looked. She was certain that he made a better-looking girl than he did a boy. Immediately after she reached that conclusion, she tried to pretend to herself that she had not thought it. However, she quickly realized that as long as she saw her son wearing female clothes, she would not be able to forget it. As he came to stop in front of her, Isabel said, "You look wonderful, Faith." "Thanks, Mom," Andy replied in a low voice. "I really mean it. Look at you. If I didn't know, I wouldn't be able to tell. Wow. I bet Serena would die to look." "Serena would what, Mom?" Andy asked with raised eyebrows. "Nothing, dear. Are you ready to go?" Andy shrugged and said, "Ready as I'll ever be, I guess." Isabel grinned at her son as she grabbed his hand and led him out to her car. Isabel drove them to a nearby mall. After she parked the car, she led him inside. Andy followed his mother as she walked into a Neiman Marcus. Isabel led Andy over to the trousers. He watched as she perused the racks for something that caught her interest. Suddenly she stopped and took out a pair of Italian, white wide-leg trousers. Andy caught sight of the price tag, and his eyes nearly bugged out. No wonder, Dad used to complain about your shopping trips, Andy thought. His mother asked, "What do you think, Faith?" Feeling that there was no risk of embarrassment given his appearance, Andy responded, "They're nice looking." "What are they, linen?" Isabel nodded before Andy continued, "They've got some nice detailing around the waist." "Yes, they're pleated, dear. They look nice and look like they'll be comfortable on you." "I think so too, dear. I'm definitely going to try these on later." Andy smiled at his mother's response. While he felt a little strange giving his opinion on a pair of pants for his mother, he was also elated to see that his mother actually was listening to his opinion on them. He realized that he was enjoying grading the pants in a way that he had never experienced when he selected his own male clothing. Isabel decided she would try on the pants and headed over towards a rack of blouses to find a top to go with the pants. Andy watched as his mother thumbed through the rack before she pulled out an aqua-colored, ruffled blouse. Andy felt the top's georgette fabric and instantly wanted one for himself, but the price tag he caught sight of quickly convinced him that it was not worth it. Isabel asked her son what he thought of the top. Andy looked at the shirt's ruffled trimmings, sweetheart neckline and the double spaghetti straps that connected in the back of the top. He was surprised to see that shirt contained both spaghetti straps and sleeves. He had never seen a blouse like it before. He had no idea what the purpose of the straps was, but he liked the unusual look they gave the shirt. He also thought that the three-quartered balloon sleeve shirt with smocked barrel cuffs was very pretty. Andy went through every detail he saw in it as he told his mother how much he liked the blouse. Isabel nodded at his remarks and said, "I think you're right, Faith." A feeling of strange delight came over Andy as he heard that his mother again agreed with his opinion on a garment. "I'm a little fashionista," Andy thought with a smile. The smile quickly faded as Andy remembered that he was supposed to be a man. "How can I think something like that?" he wondered. Isabel then pulled Andy over to the dress department. After 20 minutes, she selected a black dress with a silver sequined butterfly on the bodice. Andy gazed at the dress's V neckline, short batwing sleeves and the ruching on the pencil skirt of dress. He smiled at his mother and said, "It's very pretty, Mom. I like the ruching on the bottom." "Is that the right word, Mom?" "Yes, dear," Isabel answered with a smile as she looked at her son holding the bottom of the dress. She thought to herself, "So this is what it feels like for my friends when they shop with their daughters." Andy then paused and said, "I like the butterfly design, but I wonder how much it's going to weigh down the dress. We'll have to see when I try it on, but I like the design too." His mother's agreement with his opinion prompted another smile to come across Andy's face. This time it stayed there as he felt strangely at ease as he realized that having an opinion on fashion while dressed as a girl did not make him gay. He realized that he liked it, and he figured that he might as well enjoy it. With her selections in hand, Isabel then went into the changing room. She put on each article of clothing and showed it off to Andy. He agreed with his mother that everything fit her perfectly. Isabel offered to buy Andy clothing there as well as she finished trying on her clothing choices. Andy declined her offer. He explained that the clothing in the store was too expensive for him to justify owning. Isabel responded that the cost was not an issue, but Andy countered that he did not think it was worth it to spend that much on clothes he would not wear very often. Isabel smirked at Andy. She responded, "Well, if you don't get something here, I'll have to take you someplace else." Andy nodded and said he was fine with that. Isabel shrugged and headed for the registers with Andy. After Isabel finished paying for her new clothes, she led Andy out into the mall. She took him to the Bloomingdale's that was situated a few stores down from the Neiman Marcus. Andy knew that the store was also high-end, and he said, "I still think this place is too expensive." Isabel shook her head and replied, "It's not quite as expensive as the other store, but this place does have quality clothing. You'll find something you like here." Andy nodded as he walked into the store beside her. Isabel brought him to where most of the skirts were first. Andy proceeded to look through the racks with his mother. Andy was more fixated on the price tags than the appearance of the skirts. He noticed the skirts were not as obscenely expensive as they were at Neiman Marcus, but he still felt they were too expensive for half a dress. Isabel broke Andy's train of thought by saying, "Look at this." Andy peered over and saw the miniskirt his mother was holding. Andy initially thought the skirt was very pretty. It was multicolored with a contrast sequin pattern. However, he felt that one miniskirt was enough for a guy. He knew that he was not very comfortable in the one he was wearing. If he was going to be wearing girls' clothing in public again, he wanted it to be less revealing. So, Andy shook his head at his mother. Isabel pouted as she put the skirt back. She then continued to look through the racks and pulled out another skirt. Andy looked over at his mother's second selection. Andy took hold of it. It was a body-hugging banded, shiny black miniskirt with silver foil details. As he looked over the skirt, Andy knew that it was the type of thing girls wore to draw attention to the shape of their bodies. That was not something he was inclined to do, so he again told his mother that he did not like it. Isabel asked, "What's the matter with it? Don't you think it's pretty?" "I do think it's pretty, but it's just not my style." "Why not?" Isabel asked. "First off, it's too tight for me. I don't want to reveal anything out the back if I get excited. Secondly, I like skirts that don't show that much. I want a little modesty and subtlety from my skirts." With legs like yours? Isabel exclaimed. Yes, Andy responded in a hushed voice. You'd be wasting a gift from God if you wore longer skirts, Isabel responded. I can live with that, Andy countered. Isabel shook her head and said, Come on, can't you get at least one miniskirt? I'm too old to wear them. Let me live vicariously through you a little. Andy blushed and said, I wish I could, Mom, but I'm just not comfortable with the looks I'm getting in this skirt. Isabel nodded to herself. She had seen the leers that Andy had gotten in the skirt he was wearing. She figured that it was nothing compared to what he must have gotten as a car hop, but she decided that she would let her son choose a skirt he would be comfortable in when he went out with her. She went back to looking through the racks and selected a skirt that would hit on the lower half of Andy's thigh. Andy looked at the skirt and said, The length is fine, let me check it out. Andy took hold of the skirt and examined it. It was a black and gold sequin skirt with a black lace trim. Andy nodded and said, I like this. I'll have to try it on. Fantastic, Isabel said as she clasped her hands and took the skirt from Andy. They then went back to perusing through the skirts. Isabel then picked out another skirt for her son. He looked at the skirt in her hand and started to shake his head. The beige skirt was a multi-tiered, tulle tutu skirt. Andy blushed and said, That's too girly girl for me. Isabel huffed and put it back. Andy shook his head with a smile and thought to himself, Yes, Mom, that's just what I need, to look like a ballerina. He then reached into a rack and selected a skirt himself. Isabel came over and looked at it. It was a black tube skirt, with alternating ruched panels of jersey and satin and asymmetrical draping of the hemline. She smiled at Andy and said, That's a great-looking skirt. Andy nodded and handed it to her before she took him over to look at tops. Andy looked through the tops and quickly made two selections. He first picked out a black, sequin t-shirt. He then selected a short-sleeved, white cotton top with a scoop neckline lined with rhinestones and crystals. Andy realized that he was actually drawn to rhinestones as he looked at the shirt. He had no idea why he found them to be pretty or wanted to wear them. He knew that the garments and accessories he was wearing had them too. He wondered if his mother knew that he liked them. He figured that that could not be the case because he was not even aware that he liked them until that moment. He wondered if it was a coincidence. However, part of him was sure that it was not. Andy decided to ask his mother why she bought him so many things with rhinestones. I noticed how you stared at them when you saw girls wearing them. I just assumed you liked the way they looked, Isabel replied with a smirk. He nodded to himself before Isabel took his hand and brought him to the dress department. Andy's eyes were immediately drawn to a belted, animal print, sheath dress with a zip back. He badly wanted the dress from the moment he caught a glimpse of it. Isabel noticed that the hemline would fall midway down his thighs. As he found one of the dresses in his size, she asked, What happened to the need for subtlety and modesty? Andy blushed as he replied, That only applies to skirts. Andy was well aware that his mother knew that the answer was a complete fabrication. He had simply forgotten his concerns when he saw the dress and was looking for any distinction to back up his previous claim. Isabel then picked out a belted white, scoop neck, long sleeve sweater dress for him. Andy smiled at the dress and took it from her and said, Let's go to the dressing room. Andy went into the ladies' dressing room and placed each of the articles of clothing he had selected on. After he put on an outfit, he would step out of the stall, and Isabel would judge them like he had judged her outfits. Andy found that he enjoyed modeling the clothes for his mother almost as much as he enjoyed their feel. Isabel liked both of his dresses and smirked when she saw him come out in the black skirt he selected. The asymmetrical hemline resulted in the skirt resting 2 inches higher over his left knee than his right. Andy had not realized how short that made the skirt seem on one side when he selected it. Isabel smiled and said, I'm getting that for you too. Andy felt that there was no reason to fight his mother about it, so he turned and went and tried on his other skirt and top. Isabel was delighted with their appearance on him as well. Andy then changed back into his clothes and collected the clothes he had picked out in the store. He then walked beside his mother as they started to walk towards the front of the store. As they made their way up to the registers, Isabel came to a stop. Andy looked at her as he held his selections in his arm. Andy glanced at the bras she was looking at. She selected a white bra and a black one and said, "These are for you, Faith." Andy blushed as he saw his mother holding padded bras for him. As much as he wanted the bras to help him achieve a feminine appearance, he still could not help but feel that it was strange that his mother was selecting bras for him. She then motioned for him to follow her as they headed into the hosiery area. She looked through the store's collection of tights and selected several pairs. Andy watched his mother as she picked out several pairs of opaque, control top, black tights as well as a pair of white opaque tights. Andy figured that that would be the end of their shopping, but Isabel decided to deter them again and took them into the shoe department. She smiled and said, "I forgot for a second that you can't wear tights with any of your shoes." Isabel smiled for a second as they walked through the shoe department. She noticed that Andy seemed genuinely excited about picking out his own shoes. As Andy looked for shoes in his size, Isabel cautioned him to remember to not buy anything too tight. Isabel saw Andy restricting himself to wedges, flats and 1-inch heels. She asked him why he was doing so. Andy explained by telling his mother about his problems with heels at the dance. Isabel laughed and said, "That was because you weren't used to them. You have to build yourself up to 4-inch heels, you silly girl." His mother's admonishment brought smiles to the faces of other shoppers. Isabel then told him to select one pair of wedges, flats, 1-inch heels, and a pair of 2-inch heels. Andy gladly complied with her command. He selected a pair of metallic ballet flats and a pair of black, tall, suede boots with a 2.5-inch wedge. Isabel then suggested a pair of white, patent leather, 1-inch heeled shoes. Andy was instantly attracted to the shoes. He tried a pair of them on and found that they fit him well. He then selected a pair of 2-inch heeled black pumps. With his shoes chosen, Andy's selections were rung up by a clerk in the shoe department. Andy looked at the bags as they piled up on the counter. He took hold of them as his mother paid for the shoes and clothing. After they finished shopping in the store, Isabel told Andy that they were going home. Andy felt relieved that he would not be going anywhere else in a skirt that day. However, he felt a little disappointed about that at the same time. Andy realized that he was getting the same thrill shopping with his mom that he got from working as a car hop. The constant fear of exposure kept his heart racing, while the lack of anyone noticing that he was a man beneath his clothes was making him feel good about himself. Isabel drove him home, and Andy went and carried his new clothes into his bedroom. He hung them in the closet and felt a strange bit of relief that he would still be getting the opportunity to dress up as a girl. He smirked to himself as he wondered if his mother realized that it was really no punishment at all for him. Andy decided to get ready for the rest of his night. He disrobed and dressed once more in his male clothing. He let down his hair and tied it back in a low ponytail centered on his head before he turned to removing his makeup. As he took it off his face, he saw the effeminate-looking boy coming into view in his mirror. He felt disappointed to see that slowly emerging face, but he knew that that boy was who he really was, for better or for worse. Andy walked out of his bedroom slightly depressed to be wearing his male clothing. He went into the kitchen and saw his mother cooking dinner. He volunteered to help her prepare their meal. Isabel was happy for his assistance and delegated him some tasks. As they worked side by side, Isabel said, "I really enjoyed spending time with your other side today." Andy smiled and said, "I enjoyed it too, Mom." Isabel turned and hugged him and replied, "I'm glad to hear it because I intend on spending a lot more time with my daughter in the future." Andy nodded and tried to make it appear to his mother that he was begrudgingly accepting her plans for him. When his mother turned away towards the food cooking on the stovetop, he cracked a smile as he was overjoyed by his mother's plans.